Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the LSU Sports Insider for Friday, July the 18th. I'm Zach Ewing, along with advocate LSU baseball beat writer Koki Riley. Back with you. Our staff has been kind of crisscrossing the country for coverage, for vacations, for everything else. And we are fully aware SEC football media days were this week. We're not ignoring those. We're actually just going to push that episode to Monday. After everything's kind of over. Wilson Alexander, Scott Rabelais will be back in town. I don't know. It's talking season, so we'll talk about it. Football practice doesn't start for another couple of weeks. So in the meantime, we bring back Koki, you're finally at the tail end of your insanely busy season here. The MLB draft finished up earlier this week, and all the transfer portal additions are happening and probably mostly done, and we can finally kind of take a all but finalized look at what LSU's roster will look like next season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they had to wait for the draft to end and sort of get that all over with to really sort of dive in on the specific needs that this team had. The spots that they just needed to fill. And I think, they didn't lose a ton of players who were kind of on the fence in terms of whether they were going to come back for, a senior season or not. But what they did lose was a lot of freshman signees, and that sort of informed the way they were going to build this thing out for this season. And so they kind of headed to next year with a pretty old roster, like a really old roster. There are sixth-year seniors. There's, I believe, a seventh-year senior on this upcoming season's team. But yeah, I think overall you're gonna get a much older team next year, and a team that also has a lot more returning on the pitching side, at least. And then offensively, they've added a whole group of new infielders. So we'll break it down more in full, but that's what we've got heading into next year at the moment.
Yeah, like every sports roster construction in college athletics has become more complicated, right? With the transfer portal and with NIL and with the ways you can do different things. Baseball's always been kind of complicated anyway, because you just don't know not only which of your players will get drafted, which other sports deal with, but also incoming freshmen could get drafted, or they could choose to stay with you. And like you said, you have to almost wait for that process to play out before you can make final decisions. And then there's players across the country who are all waiting for it too. So we're going to kind of go through each of the different categories, say, of how players are coming or going from Baton Rouge. And then we'll take a kind of a final look at the, like I said, mostly finished product. Don't want to leave out the chance that something else could happen, but
it's like 95. It might be 100% done, but it's at least 95% done. If you just look at the numbers and the fact that they're not going to go over 40 in part because technically they should only have 34 players, but there are exceptions where they can have more than 34. So I think you're going to look at 34 to 40 players on next year's team.
So we'll start with, this is kind of the obvious category, the guys on last year's team who were drafted. And there's some notable names who weren't drafted, and we'll get to those too. But, I think we first need to go ahead and give Cade Anderson his flowers, Koki. He's picked number 3 overall by Seattle Mariners. Go Mariners. It was a little bit of a surprise. I mean, I think if you had said in January, everybody would have said, oh, wow, number 3 pick. Or even in April, people would have said, okay, that sounds right. By the time the draft had come around, everybody kind of thought Cade Anderson might be the Washington Nationals choice at number 1. They went with a prep shortstop from Oklahoma instead, and then the Angels also pass on Cade Anderson at number 2. So by the time the draft rolled around, it was almost like Cade fell a little bit. But I think number 3, I mean, look, for where we expected him, say, a year ago or even earlier this season, this is a great accomplishment for Cade.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason he didn't go number 1, I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that Washington was looking to go under slot with that first pick so they could spread out the money throughout the rest of the draft. And that's exactly what they did. Mm-hmm. They even picked one of LSU's high school signees in the 4th round in Miguel Sime. So it was almost a double whammy slap in the face from the Nationals to LSU. over this past week. So yeah, that's what Washington did, and Eli Willits, who's the son of Reggie Willits, the former outfielder, the former Los Angeles Angel, he became the first overall pick, high school shortstop out of Oklahoma. Not quite as heralded as Ethan Holiday, who also was thought to be potentially the number 1 overall pick, but very good prospect. They were able to get him well under slot, and because of that, they were able to sort of build out the rest of their draft. I think the even bigger surprise was, the Angels passing up on Anderson and getting Tyler Bremner, because it sounds like they signed Bremner to full slot. Like that was not an under slot deal. And that was a guy that was not connected to the Angels at number 2 at all. And that was just a major surprise, because it looks like they're going to try to advance Bremner up the system, get into the major leagues as quickly as possible. That's what they did with their second round pick, who we'll mention later as well. So I think like the first pick with Willits wasn't a major shocker. He was kind of rumored to be potentially in the mix for that because of the slot money. But number 2 with Bremner was a shock. Well, that was a shock with the Angels going with him. Didn't have a great season this year, even though heading into the year, there were thoughts that Bremner could be, toward the top of the draft. So yeah, that's kind of where they're at right now. And then Anderson with the Mariners at 3. I mean, it was just a perfect situation for him to just sort of slide in there to this great pitching development staff and pitching development team.
I want to interject real quick, Koki. I think we should have mentioned too, with the Bremner situation, he gets full slot at number 2, and Cade actually took slightly under slot at number 3. He signs for $8.8 million. That's $700,000 under slot with the Mariners. So the Angels, that really was the shocker that they would go Bremner. I mean, obviously they liked him better, but I think if you listen to what people in Seattle said, like they were very happy to get Cade Anderson. He was every GM in every sport says, "Oh, we got the number 1 player on our board." I mean, like you hear that all the time, and who knows if it's true. I think for the Mariners, it might actually be true. And then from Cade's side, as you said, like Seattle's history of developing pitching, you look at the young rotation that they have in place, your Logan Gilberts, your George Kirby's, your Brian Wu's, these guys who have come up pretty quickly through the minors and had immediate success in the majors. I think it's a pretty good fit for him too.
Yeah, I mean the Mariners like a guy with a good changeup, right? Like they got that fastball changeup combination, and those are kind of the basis of their pitching arsenals, and then they can sort of work their way through the rest of it. And Anderson's probably more polished than a lot of these other guys that they brought in, like a Brian Wu, right? Or didn't he have a lot of control issues going up when they initially brought him in?
I think went to Cal Poly and had and the reason I'm a Mariner fan, so I know way more about this than I expect. But Brian Wu had an ERA of over 5 his last year at Cal Poly. I mean, he was not considered. They drafted him fairly low. So for the Mariners and for Cade Anderson, this might be kind of a slam dunk. That's not to say, I mean, things happen. It's hard to make the major leagues when we're not. I don't think Cade Anderson is the next Paul Skeens or anything, but his path looks pretty well set. Now he is not going to pitch the rest of 2025. Pretty common for a college pitcher, especially one that goes all the way through the College World Series, to kind of take the rest of the season off. But I would expect once he gets into the minors, he's probably going straight to AA, and he's going to be in the majors before too long, assuming there's no roadblocks.
Yeah, if all goes well, he'll be in the major leagues next season at some point. Maybe not at the beginning of the year, like at the very beginning of the year, but at this point next year, if he's in the major leagues, would you be shocked? I wouldn't be, just given how polished he is and given how good of a situation he's in right now. All it takes is a couple of injuries, and then he's the next guy in, because I think he's going to show up there and be, probably their best pitching prospect immediately, I had to imagine. And Mariners have a lot of good hitting prospects right now, but they don't have a ton of. I mean, they do have organizational pitching depth, obviously, in the major league level, but they don't have a ton of guys who are like Anderson, right?
Yeah, I think I saw a list that he'll be immediately their number 2 or number 3 prospect behind a couple of hitters, so he will be their top pitching prospect for sure. So yeah, good fit for him. And then kind of moving on down the list, the next LSU player taken was Chase Shores, who goes to the Angels at number 47 overall. We all saw what Chase was doing in the postseason out of the bullpen when he's just pumping 100-mile-an-hour gas. He also has starter upside for the Angels. And as you mentioned, that's a franchise that loves to just accelerate their prospects all the way through to the majors. So he's another guy you could see,
Yeah.
playing in the big leagues before too long.
Yeah, there were some teams, if he went there, you would have thought, okay, maybe they're going to let him marinate and try to make him into a starter, right? But with the Angels, they are not one of those teams because of what you mentioned, right? Where they like to take their prospects and get them up to the major leagues as quickly as possible. Like Nolan Shanuel from a couple of years ago didn't play a single game in the minor leagues. They literally just put him right in the majors. Christian Moore came to the majors very quickly. They have a history of doing this, and I think you're going to see this with Chase, and they're going to keep him as a reliever and then shoot him up to the major league as quickly as possible. This is why they picked him in the second round. And it's a surprise that he went, before Anthony Ianssen, and it was, and we can talk about Ianssen in a bit, but I think it's a great fit. In terms, maybe not a great fit because the Angels aren't the greatest organization in baseball, but it makes sense, like it in terms of getting him as a reliever, he could pitch for this team in September out of the bullpen. I wouldn't be shocked if that happened. That's what we're talking about here with the Angels going with Chase Shores in the second round.
Yeah, if they were in contention, I think you'd see that. I don't know that there's even the Angels may not.
They always think they're in contention.
Well, yeah,
and technically they kind of are. Like they're around 500 right now, which is weird. But
is it
I don't understand
bad long term, Koki? Is it bad long term for Chase Shores that he may get pigeonholed as a reliever early in his career?
Probably, yeah. In terms of like, but it's because it's not like he's Chris Cortez from last year, who's like he was the reliever / long reliever from Texas A&M, where there was really it was hard to see a path for him to become a starter at any point, just given his delivery, the pitches that he had, all that sort of stuff. Like there are some like reliever types who you could see develop into being a starter, or starters who obviously you keep on that path, right? And Shores, like, yeah, right now you could put him in the major leagues as a reliever, and that'd be cool to see early on and get that that instant gratification of being a major league player. But it also cuts off the possibility of making a lot of money and being the guy, the starter, right? Like it would have probably been better for his development as a player, because I still think there is a chance that he could be a starter. Like it's so cutting off that fairly real possibility is tough, because I don't think he's a reliever only. I think there's a chance for him to start still.
Yeah, and look, we don't know. I mean, maybe the Angels have plans to at least try him as a starter, or it's not to say that he couldn't come up immediately as a reliever and then transition into being a starter over the next couple
of years. Hard to do at the major league level, though.
Yeah, it is. It is, and like if you're a good reliever, it's you see Jordan Hicks of the Giants has done it to a moderate amount of success, but like he,
and now he's a reliever again.
Yeah, it's just hard to do. So I don't know if that's the best thing in the world, but we'll see. I mean, this is all very early, all very speculative. You mentioned Anthony Ianssen. He goes to the third round. I'm a Mariners fan. You're a Red Sox fan, so you get to talk about this one.
Yeah. So this was really interesting because he doesn't really fit the pitching profiles that they've necessarily gone after. Usually they like guys with a lower arm slot. Usually they like guys who are pumping 100 miles an hour, especially the latter. Like they love those hard throwing pitchers. I mean, they just traded for Jordan Hicks. They traded for Kyle Harrison, who's really known for his fastball shape, really unique fastball shape. Like they traded for this guy, Pedro Alcala, who had these terrible numbers, but he threw 100, so they picked him up anyway. And Anthony's not really that pitcher. He's very reliant on his off-speed stuff. He's really good at locating his pitches. He's up to 94, 95, but he really sits closer to 92, 93. But he's a good athlete. He gives them a unique look in their system. He's very different than a lot of the other pitchers that they have. And then maybe that's part of the appeal here. And again, he's a very high floor player because of his command and his athleticism. So maybe they think they can sort of increase his velocity. They have a history of doing that as well. Peyton Tolley, their second round pick last year, wasn't really known for throwing 98, 99. Now he's throwing 98, 99 just a year into the system. So maybe that's sort of the development path here, because they already know he has the command. They already know he has an elite slider. And maybe they see something with the fastball that they can sort of tweak and get that up to an elite pitch. Because if they can get that fastball up a couple ticks, like tick or two, where he's sitting 95, 96, 97 instead of 92, 93, 94. Now you're talking about a mid-rotation major league starter and potentially even more. So I think for the third round, he's way too good to be picked in the third round. Like, it's wild that he lasted that long. And I think the Red Sox just saw that and are like, hey, we're just going to take this guy.
Yeah, that's what that's how I feel, is whether he fits exactly the Red Sox profile or not. It got to the point where it was like the value just gets pretty extreme for them.
Yeah.
And that's not great for Anthony, because it means he makes less money right off the bat. But, slot value $907,000. That's not.
The Red Sox picked one high school player in the entire draft. So like their slot situation is that they could probably go over slot for Ianssen in the third round if that's what the money turns out to be, because I think 6 of their first 8 picks were SEC pitchers who are 6'2" or taller. Like it was insane. Like they kept on picking SEC pitcher after SEC pitcher. Their second pick, their second pick was Marcus Phillips. And he's a hard throwing righty. Their first pick was Kyson Witherspoon, hard throwing righty, really good fastball. Ianssen sort of bucks that trend a little bit, but he also continues the trend of college pitcher. They also picked Jacob Myers in the 9th round, who's kind of the ultimate example of like crazy fastball, not a lot of command, but there's something there. He could, if he figures it out, he could be an elite major league reliever. That's the ceiling. And if you can get that guy in the 9th round, that's a great pick. So kind of 2 birds with one stone. They picked 2 LSU pitchers, 2 very different profiles. But the Myers thing, that made a lot of sense to me. I was like, oh, there it is. So pretty interesting.
Speaking of Myers, we'll just kind of go quickly through some of the other LSU players who were drafted. Ethan Fry goes just 8 picks after Ianssen, number 95 overall to the Astros. I know the Astros are a love them or hate them franchise, but they also recognize talent. And I think if that's a good thing for Ethan Fry to go there. Daniel Dickinson to the Brewers in the 6th round, Jared Jones to the Pirates in the 9th round. You mentioned Jacob Myers to the Red Sox in the 9th round. Cade Woods goes to the Braves in the 10th round. Connor Ware to the Mets in the 15th round. Any quick comments on those picks, Koki?
The Fry thing is big for next year's team. And I think that informed a lot of their moves in terms of trying to get even more power hitters into the building when it came to the portal, just, the following days after the draft. I thought there was a chance that he could come back, and he's not coming back obviously now. And then I thought it was good. I was a little surprised to see. I think the biggest shock of the whole draft from an LSU perspective is Cade Woods getting picked in the 10th round. I couldn't believe that. I know that like he was going to go way under slot, and like the Braves could get him while paying more for someone like Briggs McKenzie, who was an LSU signee who they picked in the 4th round for about $1.5 million over slot or something crazy like that. But even still, like I just didn't feel like he was a draftable player. When they had other guys, I just thought Connor Benj was, or someone like that. He pitched 2 2/3 innings in 2 years. So that was a big surprise. But other than that, everything else sort of shook out to the way I thought it would. Dickinson went and Jones went later than I thought they would. I thought Jones would be more 4th or 5th round, and I thought Dickinson would be more 2nd or 3rd. And those 2 guys ended up going much later than I thought they would. So not exactly the reason. I don't exactly know the reason for either of those, other than I know Major League Baseball was pretty down on Jones in general.
Yeah, you've seen a lot of guys
stock too. Yeah.
There's a lot of examples of guys like Jones who have tremendous power, but need to work on the contact and the hit tool and things like that. And so we'll see. Jared Jones could get there, but I don't know that he was ever going to be a super high pick. So that's the current players getting taken in the draft. I don't know. Is it fair to say more painful for LSU is the guys they had signed in what was this number 1 high school recruiting class? And it got pretty decimated by the draft. The top 6 guys in that class, including Quentin Young, who was, number 11 national prospect, according to Perfect Game. He goes to the Twins in round 2. You also had Brady Ebel, the son of Dodgers third base coach Dino Ebel, who goes to the Brewers in the round 1 comp pick. Dean Moss gone, Jaden Foskey gone. I mean, like a lot of these guys, and they were high picks, so it's very unlikely that they will not sign. And LSU's freshman class really takes a hit here.
Yeah, absolutely. This is easily the most decimated this is easily the hardest they've been hit by the draft with their high school signees. There's no William Schmidt surprise. There's no Cam Johnson surprise this year. I mean, we'll get to them, but I thought there was a chance that like William Patrick and Marcos Paz, who are the two guys who didn't end up getting drafted, they were guys that I thought could get picked, but outside of that, everybody else got picked pretty much. And after the first day, things were looking okay, because I think Ebel, Foskey, Young, and probably Moss were going no matter what. Moss, I thought there was maybe a small chance that he could stay, but then that sort of went out the window pretty quickly. So and that was after day 1, and after the first 3 rounds, and only 4 guys were picked out of so many talented players. Like, okay, if they can get to the next day with only 1 or 2 guys picked, they could have still a very, very talented freshman class. And then that's just not what happened. In the 4th round, Major League Baseball just sort of killed them. Landon Hodge was the first pick of day 2 overall. He was a catcher. Could have added to that room. Could have added some competition for Cerna. He's gone. Miguel Sime, who I mentioned earlier, he was gone quickly after that. Briggs McKenzie, the lefty that I mentioned earlier, who the Braves picked up. All 3 of those guys are guys that I thought could have easily gone the first 2 or 3 rounds, and they all go off the board in the 4th. And teams were just saving up money for that day, for that early round that day, and just using them on LSU players. And all of those guys could have really, really helped them moving forward, especially McKenzie, who was one of only 2 left-handers they had committed in this class. You saw how many left-handers they added out of the portal this year. Left-handed pitching was definitely something that they wanted to address this offseason, and adding McKenzie as like a future piece would have been huge for them. And I was pretty surprised to see him not picked in the first 3, and then he goes in the 4th. Then the real sort of kick in the rear end was River Hamilton going in the 11th round by the Tigers. And there's still, I guess there's a chance that he doesn't sign because of how late it was. But my guess is that he goes, that the Tigers pick him up. And like, that was a guy, the Detroit Tigers, I should be clear. But like, that was a guy that could have really helped you out in terms of adding more young arms. And yes, you have Reagan Ricken. Yes, you have Marcos Paz. Those are 2 very talented players, but it would have been nice to have that 3rd guy to go along with them. And now you're looking at a freshman class that Paz and Patrick are guys who could be future starters and future, 1st or 2nd round picks if it all works out. But outside of that, you're looking at, and Ricken too. Ricken has a real shot at doing that as well. He was the top 150 prospect in the draft. So you have those 3 guys. And after that, it's a lot more complementary pieces. And with Cerna kind of being a wild card as this like power bat catcher who has a lot of questions on defense. So that it's still a freshman class that 95% of the teams in the country would love to have, but it could have been even better because they had so many guys who are very, very talented that Major League Baseball just snatched up. And I think they hadn't lost more than 4 or 5 guys in a draft. And 2 years ago, they only lost 1. And that was the Stephen Milam, Jake Brown class. But for this year and this year's class, it has been really, really decimated by the draft.
Yeah, I almost feel like you need to keep some perspective here, which you offered there at the end of what you said.
Yeah.
First of all, LSU has had a lot of success. Okay. And there's been kind of this narrative that, you're going to see more and more guys stay in college baseball because of NIL deals, because of the revenue sharing thing, things like that. College baseball becomes more attractive. And that is true. But that still does not mean that pro ball does not have its allure, both in the forms of dollars, in the forms of getting to the majors at a younger age. Perhaps if you have faith in yourself as a prospect, uh, you know, being the big man on campus is great. Being a big leaguer is probably even better. So, like, I I think we need to keep perspective that it's not always going to happen like it happened the last couple of years. And then also, like you said, this is still a very good class. I don't know, I don't think anyone's re-ranked the classes as far as, because we don't know exactly who's going to sign yet or anything like that. As you mentioned, there might be a couple guys who don't sign, like a River Hamilton. Maybe he comes back, but I, I still think that this class is going to end up top 10 in the country at the end of all of this. Like, I don't.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, or at least in that
They're
range.
not
So,
going to be number one, but they'll be in the
and then
top
if
10.
we'll talk about the transfer portal in a minute. Like, it's not like LSU is suffering from not having enough talent coming into to the program. And I do wonder, Koki, like, what do you think? Like, we'll talk about LSU's lineup and what it projects like going forward too. They didn't have a ton of playing time available at some of these spots either, and I wonder if that had to do with some of the decisions. Is like, well, I'm not going to go to LSU if I could get drafted as early as the second or fourth round or whatever, and I might not even start at LSU. I don't know. I mean, like, to me, this was kind of not a huge shock.
Yeah, perhaps. I just doing some reporting. This wasn't a huge shock that it was this many guys. It was more of like up to this many guys. I think it was going to be at least five or six. I think at the very least you're going to 5 or 6. The fact that it was 8 was probably more worst case scenario than best case scenario. But 4 or 5 was going to be the best case scenario because of just all the talent that they had, and some of these guys with real connections to Major League Baseball already. Like Brady Ebel's dad is the third base coach for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Like, he's a major league. He's grew up in the major leagues and in and around that environment. And went to a high school in Corona High that already had, And the other 2 guys, and Quentin Young's nephew is the nephew of Dimitri and Delman Young. So like stuff like that was that. I mean, that was going to be very, very hard. And when you look at a guy like Jaden Fauske, where he was ranked, I mean, some of these guys, even though they were drafted, they had at least some interest in coming here because they were here for summer school. Like Dean Moss was here for summer school. Jaden Fauske was here for summer school. So they took it at least somewhat seriously. Like it's not ideal given how much the signing class was hit by the draft, but there's still talent within the team, sort of like I mentioned, and they'll be fine. Given how aggressive they were in the portal as well, which I think what happened in the portal informed. What happened in the draft informed what happened in the portal, and what happened with the signees in particular affected what happened in the draft.
Well, let's
the portal.
go right into that then.
Too many things.
Yeah, let's talk about the portal. I mean, because as you said, after LSU, it's kind of confirmed that they're going to lose these guys who could have come in and had an immediate impact. They go out in the portal and fill a lot of those holes. And again, I don't think they have a ton of holes on their roster, but they did have a couple of significant ones. And if you're going to go compete for national championships, you want to make sure that they're filled, with as talented players as possible. I'm not sure the best way to put that. And they went and did that. I mean, they got so Cooper Moore comes from Kansas. Good decision. You leave Kansas. That's always good for Missouri, right?
Wow. Kansas catching strays on the.
It's not a stray. I'm staring right at him. You heard me. But this is a guy who could, like, I don't know. LSU's probably their biggest hole right now is who's going to pitch. Right, because you lose Chase Shores, you lose Anthony Ianssen, you lose Cade Anderson. Like, those were your 3 starters for most of the year last year, and so you still have Cowan and Evans who probably slot into the rotation or at least are going to compete for those spots. But you need pitching. So Cooper Moore comes in. He threw 88 innings for Kansas last year. He also visited Tennessee. Like, this is a talented guy. And then the other 2, I think, that are right off the bat you've got to mention are Trent Caraway, who played third base for Oregon State. And was a draft eligible sophomore, but was not drafted, maybe told teams he didn't want to be drafted yet. He transfers in. He had a big year last year for Oregon State. And the third one is Zach York from Grand Canyon, who hit 13 homers last year for a good program and probably slots in as like your Ethan Fry replacement.
Yeah, and this is a very interesting portal class. Caraway is probably the biggest name, and the fact that I mean this guy was a top, I think he was top 70 prospect as a high schooler coming out, but he had a very strong commitment to Oregon State, so he stayed there. He was draft eligible this year, and then was I think he was top 140, top 150 in MLB.com's rankings, despite having just an okay year last year, mediocre probably closer to mediocre than good. And he doesn't get picked, doesn't get the signing bonus that he wants, and then because of that, that informs his decision to come to a place like LSU where he wants to develop more and have another swing at the draft as a junior next year. So that was huge, and LSU could have used another third baseman. They had Braden Simpson, who could definitely play the position, but he's got a lot of flexibility. They could just slot Caraway in, and he's got power. This is a very talented player, and this is a guy who could kind of be the Daniel Dickinson kind of star infield or quasi star infield replacement. I think that's kind of the idea with a guy like Caraway, who sort of comes in and is a draft prospect immediately for them. So a potential major leaguer, as Jay Johnson liked to say. And Jay Johnson says that you need potential major leaguers you need multiple potential major leaguers on your team in order to make it to the College World Series. And adding Caraway sort of in theory is why you bring in a guy like that. And he brings power to the roster, which is what they needed after losing Fry. And Zach York does that as well. So he's a GCU transfer first baseman. He had more walks than strikeouts this past year. So it's not really a Jared Jones profile where he's going to swing and miss a whole ton. With the increased stuff in the SEC, we're probably going to see at least some more strikeouts from him. But it's a power bat, and they need power bats. And he seems like kind of the DH slot because of just his body type and size. He's a much bigger kid, it just physically than guys that they usually have. So I think he's going to be the DH. Then they can slide Simpson to second base or first base. They can slide Dardar to first base or second base. Two other transfers who they got much earlier this past month. That's kind of what the infield mix looks like at the moment. And then, as you mentioned, kind of on the pitching side, they had Cooper Moore, who's a very solid, high floor, lower ceiling right-hander. Through 88 and 2/3 innings last year. He's definitely going to be a contender for a starting spot in this year's team. There's no question about it. And I'm wondering if there's some things that they see in the delivery and the stuff where they can jack up his strikeout rates and get some more swing and miss. But he throws a ton of strikes. So that's why I'm kind of saying he's more of a high floor option because of the innings workload he's had already and because of the amount of strikes that he throws. And then probably the wildest addition of the bunch, and you didn't mention him, but it's hard to really gauge how good this guy's going to be, and it's Dax Daffy, who's pitched at Division II Angelo State the last 2 seasons. This past year, 2.99 ERA. He was one of the best pitchers in Division II, and he did it in a ton of innings, and he got a ton of strikeouts. Struck out 98 batters in 72 1/3. But how does that translate from Division II to the SEC? Is huge, and he's already played 2 years of Division I ball, but he didn't play at all in those 2 years. He also spent 2 years in a JUCO, so this is technically his 7th season of college baseball. I'm not sure why he's eligible, but apparently he tweeted out that NCAA rules allowed him to play this year, so he's coming to LSU, and he's really fascinating. I like to hear this kid's story, even though he's probably as old as me, playing another year of college baseball. They have a couple of these guys who are like 5th, 6th year guys, and they're a very old team considering that, a lot of these guys played in the COVID season. So it's kind of crazy what they have with Dax Daffy, and I'm very interested to see what he sort of looks like. Maybe he fills in the Cowan role as like a veteran guy who throws a lot of strikes. Who knows? We'll see.
I mean, yeah, he's going to be 25 when the season starts. So
yeah,
he's like a grown man playing against 18-year-old kids. So you got that advantage. I mean, but I will say with him, and then, you could maybe throw Braden Simpson in this boat too, where he had 22 home runs and had this huge season, but it was at high point. So how does it translate to the SEC?
At least that's Division I.
Well, yes, but
Division
I mean,
II.
I think The point for both of them is that Jay Johnson and LSU staff are not taking these guys in if they don't see something that they think will
Yeah,
translate,
of
right? Like they're
course,
not.
of course.
Same thing with
Yeah,
Daniel Dickinson from Utah Valley last year. Like you're not bringing that guy in if you think he's just getting by because he's facing lower competition. Like he obviously, these guys have something they think that whether that works out or not, we'll see. I mean, not every
yeah.
transition is perfect,
That's
and
kind
not
of
every
more of
player.
what I'm saying. Yeah, we'll
Right.
see. You
But
know.
I do think it's interesting. And then glad you also mentioned Seth Darter, the Mandeville native who transferred
Mhm.
in from K-State, and he'll be in the infield mix as well.
And they
Um,
also added a bunch of left-handers, just to mention. We haven't talked about even the portal moves before the draft, and they added a bunch of lefties before the draft because that was such a clear need,
mhm.
and these guys weren't draft eligible that they were bringing in. So they added Danny Lockenmeyer at a 2.37 ERA this past year at North Dakota State. He actually pitched against LSU briefly when they were here. Seems like a pretty talented lefty. He's got a lot of strikeouts last year. I'm pretty confident that he's going to be pretty deeply into that bullpen mix as a lefty. They also added Ryler Smart, who redshirted last year at Tennessee, didn't pitch a single inning, dealt with an injury last year, but he's a kind of a high upside. He's basically like adding a freshman lefty because he didn't pitch at all last year, and and Tennessee wanted him, so he's good enough for LSU quite clearly. And Santiago Garcia, who is another lefty, struck out 40 batters, 30 innings for Oregon last year as a sophomore. He went to the same high school as Stephen Milam, so both from Las Cruces, New Mexico. So that's going to be an interesting storyline to look out for. And they needed those three lefties because they were really bringing back maybe DJ Primo. It looks like DJ Primo is coming back, and they're also bringing in. Bring back Cooper Williams, of course. So they needed the left-handed help, and they have probably a little bit more depth than they even had last year.
I'm an Albuquerque boy, not Las Cruces, but shout out the land of enchantment as well. So, yeah, it's LSU's just they're not resting on laurels here. They've won 2 national championships in the last 3 years. They're being very aggressive as you would expect. Incoming freshmen, Koki, we talked about how kind of decimated that freshman class was. Who do you think comes in and has an impact or a chance to start?
I think Cerna, as he's mentioned at the bottom of the screen, he's going to fill into the Cade Arambidi role where he plays almost every midweek game. He develops slowly behind the starter and Arambidi. I think if they need someone in a pinch defensively, they're probably going to go to Yemen before they go to Cerna because from at least what I've heard, it seems like Cerna has a lot of work to do defensively.
Yeah,
He's a much bigger kid than
that's the wild
Arambidi
card.
even is. So he's a real wild card defensively. But offensively, he's got big power. He's a big kid. And that's kind of the appeal there. And he was like a top 200-ish prospect. So I wasn't that shocked that he decided to just come to school. Depending on whatever he was asking for out of the draft. So you have him. I think Reagan Ricken has a chance to make some sort of impact out of the bullpen. Him and Marcos Paz. I think Paz probably would have been a first or second round pick if he hadn't gotten hurt. And he got Tommy John surgery last summer. But he was one of the most talented pitchers in the state of Texas this past year. And he was already kind of throwing bullpens and doing workouts for teams heading into the draft. So there was definitely some buzz as him getting picked, despite the fact that he got hurt. But I guess he just didn't get the signing bonus that he wanted, and now he's coming to school. And that's a pretty big addition for LSU, honestly. I would put him right up there with a lot of the fourth round guys who got picked. Maybe not in the first day guys who got picked, like the Brady Ebels, or I'd honestly put him right around the range of Brady Ebel, but like even a guy like Briggs McKenzie or some of the other guys who looked like they were goners for sure. Quentin Young, Jaden Fauske. He's maybe not quite on that level as a prospect, but he's very good. He's really good. He's very talented. I've heard I talked to one scout who was at the workout that he did, and he looked really good. And now he's starting to slowly throw again. My guess is that he'll probably be ready by the start of this year. He probably won't throw a ton this fall. He still has some work to do from Tommy John, but he'll be a year and a half removed from the surgery by the time we get to February. So my guess is that he'll kind of be on the Gage jump track in terms of getting ready for this upcoming season. Reagan Rickens, a talented right-hander from California. They're adding him into the mix as well. I know I already mentioned him, but just figured I wanted to do that again. And then the most talented, and then in terms of like positional players, another guy they're adding is William Patrick, who was one of the top players in Louisiana this past year. Freaky athlete, outfielder, very raw. There's quite a bit of swing and miss with his profile here, but he's big, he's strong, and he's fast. So he's he's going to slide in as more of like a fourth or fifth outfielder for this team. So if something happens to Jake Brown or Derek Curiel or Chris Stanfield, they can sort of slide in there. And we didn't mention this in the draft, players from last year profile, part of the program, but Zach Cowan and bring back Zach Cowan and Chris Stanfield is pretty huge. They didn't have to search for another outfielder if Stanfield was coming back. If Stanfield wasn't going to come back, they were going to have to search for an outfielder, someone who they could plug in and start right away. But now they have their entire returning outfield coming back from last year, and that was one of the strengths of last year's team. And now that's coming in place for another season. And then with Zach Cowan, now you have another potential starter, a guy who was lights out in the College World Series against Arkansas, and now he's coming back for another season at LSU. That's a huge, huge addition. I think Evans and Cowan are kind of on the fast track to starting. I think Evans is basically a lock to start next season. And who fills that third spot, who fills in the roles that Cowan and Evans had, those are still the major question marks when it comes to the pitching staff. But bringing back Cowan and bringing back Stanfield in particular, that's huge.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I'm glad you mentioned it, because we should not have glossed over that fact. That's a couple of huge draft wins for LSU, to bring those guys back. And so with that in mind, let's kind of wrap things up with what this roster looks like. Again, you look at the last 5 years there's always been a lot of turnover on college baseball rosters. The last 5 years, there's been even an accelerated turnover. And the result is that these teams that kind of go all in and are able to win national championships, like Ole Miss, Mississippi State, both missed the tournament the next year. LSU, when they won, they had to fight to make the tournament, kind of rally late in the 2024 season. Tennessee this year did make a super regional, but they clearly were not the same team that they were last year. So LSU, I think the roster is in pretty good shape. You mentioned Cowan and Evans. What a great place to start that is. And then you're with Stanfield back now, your entire starting outfield back, including Jake Brown, who is the strong side of a platoon. Now will probably start every day. But, you've just I think that's a really good starting point. The infield is going to have holes to fill. We talked about the transfer portal that will help with that. But Stephen Milam is also, if you're going to pick one guy to have back, it's starting shortstop, right? So, I don't know. I think they're in pretty good shape. Obviously, there are holes to fill. Everybody's going to have holes to fill. But what say you?
Yeah, I think with the positional players, I think we know who's going to start. It's just a matter of who plays where. Will Dardar be the first baseman or the second baseman? Will Simpson be the first baseman or the second baseman? I think Caraway's a lock to start at third. I think Milam's obviously a lock at short. You have the same starting outfield as last year. I think Aaron Beatty's a lock to start at catcher. And yeah, Zach York's gonna play first or DH. It's not that complicated. They don't have quite the same positional player depth and versatility that they had last season. That's what made last season's team so interesting, right? Where Josh Pearson, Ethan Fry, and Jake Brown were battling for two spots. You had Ashton Larson, who didn't play, who just transferred to Texas, and Texas took him on. And he just didn't really get a chance to play much at all this past season. It would have been nice to have. It'd be nice for them to have a little bit more depth at some of these spots. Not to say that Patrick can't earn some sort of role, or that Tanner Reeves can earn a role in terms of working in a platoon with one of these guys as a left-handed hitter. I could see that, and not have to force him to play third base. I could definitely see that, but outside of him, it's maybe Daniel Harden can work in some sort of role. Harden is a junior college transfer who maybe he was going to join this year's team, but then that didn't really end up panning out. And he's another outfielder that they can sort of add into the mix as a fourth or fifth outfielder. So I mean, like those are kind of the candidates for the, the Josh Pearson role, the Ethan Fry role that he had at the beginning of the year, the bench guys who are at the end of the day, they're probably on the bench, but they can work in a platoon role. Right. And they don't have a lot of that this year, which is, I guess, that'd be the one question mark you'd have for the positional player group, which is that's a pretty small question mark to have when you have, starting caliber guys at every single other position. Then on the pitching side, I think they're in great shape. I think that they have the right-handed depth. They have plenty of right-handed pitchers, plenty of right-handed depth, plenty of talent, plenty of different sorts of pitchers from all different sorts of levels in terms of age groups. Returners, they're in much better shape this year than they were going into next year than they were going into this year when it comes to the pitching, in part because of they just have more returning players with Cowan and Evans, and they're just in really great shape with those guys. So I think of the positional player group, obviously there's going to be question marks with transfers and how they translate over to the SEC. And they do have some transfers from the pitching side as well, and see how they translate over to the SEC. But at the very least, though, your floor is going to be pretty high when you have those guys. And you also have someone like Jaden Newt coming back as well. So, they're in really, really good shape right now. I think the talk of the town is going to be just, can they repeat? And how realistic is it to expect them to repeat? And what have they learned from the 2024 season where they had the opportunity to repeat and they just didn't? So it's going to be a very interesting season, to say the least.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this program is in such a good place. To hear you say the pitching is in much better place than it was this time a year ago, when the pitching was, I mean, Kate Anderson, Anthony Ianssen, Zach Cowan, Case and Evans were the reason that LSU won the national championship, if you had to point to one thing. And so the fact that you're saying the pitching's in a better place than that is really amazing. I mean, and that's not to say that it's going to develop at the same rate, but then you add in the fact that you have 4 position player starters returning, which is more than you usually get from a program like this, because you're usually hit hard by the draft. But you have Curiel, you have Stanfield, you have Brown, and you have Milam all coming back. And then you kind of filled the other holes. Kate Arambidi was always sort of the starter in waiting at catcher. And then you filled the other holes, with some transfers who look like they're going to be plug and play. So this program's in really good shape. Probably the last time we talk LSU baseball for at least a little while, Koki. But I think it's crazy to say it's never easy to repeat, but that is very clearly the goal here.
Yeah, and it should be the goal, right? Just given the standard of this program and winning 2 national championships in 3 years, right? Like they're going for the dynasty. Like that's what they should be going for. Become the UConn of the UConn women's basketball of baseball, to become the LSU of LSU baseball, right? They've already done this, and they did it under Skip Bertman, but this is a much different time, much different era, like a lot more transactions, a lot more players going in and out. So even a lot more talent across the board. So, and you mentioned with the pitching, it is interesting because it was like Anthony Ianssen was a small school transfer. Kate Anderson was like a midweek starter through 30 some odd innings. And Casey Evans was a freshman, kind of like that middle tier of the freshman class. And Zach Cowan was a transfer from Wofford. And would you expect all 4 of those guys to pitch as well as they did? Well, that's why they won the national championship, because they all, not only reached their potential, but burst through that ceiling. This year, they're going into it with a much higher floor because 2 of those guys are back. And then you add in a lot of the guys that we just talked about who are at least as high caliber as someone like Ianssen was, like a Cooper Moore, right? Not saying that transfers are automatically going to be great the moment they come in. That hasn't always been the case, even at a place like LSU. But it's hard not to trust them to the point where at least, half of these guys are going to work out, right? So it's their program's just in a really good spot, overall. It's just hard to argue with that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, so that will kind of wrap up our baseball offseason talk. We're going to be, as I mentioned earlier in the show, full bore on football really starting next week. So Wilson Alexander, Scott Ravelay will join me on Monday for the next episode. Feel free to subscribe to our LSU Tigers at NOLA.com YouTube channel. Subscribe to the LSU Sports Insider podcast. You can find it either on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Koki, appreciate you. Go enjoy some R&R, and then we'll see you for football season.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. We will talk to you guys next time here on the LSU Sports Insider.